You're listening to From the Heart of the Church with Father Joseph Fowler from the Basilica of St. Michael the Archangel in Pensacola, Florida. In this episode, we'll talk about the doctors of the church, Father.
Yes, the doctors of the church are the ones who so powerfully communicated the church's teaching, sometimes being identified as doctors far away from the time in which they lived. In fact, the earliest doctor of the church identified is St. Irenaeus of Lyon. He lived in the 2nd century, but he wasn't named a doctor of the church until Pope Francis, just recently in 2022. A few episodes ago, I mentioned when we were talking about the papal election, how far down the list of priorities I felt that the question of Latin in the liturgy would be because of so many things that are happening in the world today that seem to be more important than that. However, I think Latin is something that we have to have a great reverence for and a great appreciation for, and to the extent possible, a knowledge of, because it informs so much of what we do even in our American modern day life. So for example, doctor in Latin is a word that means teacher. There are 2 words in Latin that mean teacher, at least 2 words. Doctor is one and magister is another. And people have probably heard the term magisterial, the magisterial authority of the church's magisterium. That all comes from that Latin word magister, meaning teacher. It's the church's teaching authority. And even in the modern day, the 2 levels of educational authority or educational recognition that we give to people are the master's degree, which connects with that Latin word magister, and the doctorate degree, which connects with the Latin word doctor. Both of these words mean teacher, but they were different types of teachers. So a doctor was more of a professor, and a magister was more of a classroom teacher or a school teacher. And in fact, the old word for a classroom teacher was a schoolmaster, right? The old schoolmaster. And that master is where we get the master's degree from the magister. So the doctors are those people who, it's not that they achieved the highest academic recognition, but that they had the greatest ability to articulate certain aspects of the faith. And so they're singled out as people who communicated something so important that everyone should know it. So for example, Pope Francis recently in 2022 named St. Irenaeus of Lyon a doctor of the church. Now St. Irenaeus was a saint long before that, but only in 2022 was he identified as a doctor of the church. And Pope Francis named him the Doctor Unitatis, the doctor of unity, for all that he did to join Christians who were not united. We'll say more about that when we talk about St. Irenaeus. But the church is constantly at work recognizing people and ideas and writings that need to be communicated. And so by identifying a doctor of the church, Pope Francis, along with many other popes who have done the same thing for the 37 doctors that exist in the church, was communicating something of the message of unity. We live in a world where Christians are so disunited and so fractured and fragmented all across the world, and this was an effort to communicate, here's a teaching about how we should be one. And St. Irenaeus, as a great teacher of that, was identified as a doctor. In this time too, the church is constantly at work to canonize and identify people who, in every age of our history, have been living in such holiness and such model exemplary lives of Christian discipline and Christian spirituality that they should be put out there, not to congratulate them or to reward them, their reward is heaven, but to single them out as people that we need to look at and see and imitate and follow. And so currently, even now, in this part of the country, there are people who are being put forward as potential martyrs to be canonized for the church, the Martyrs of La Florida.
You mentioned there were 37 doctors
Yes.
of the church. Are all those already saints?
Yes. So a doctor of the church is someone who is not only has contributed in terms of writing, but also lived in an exemplary and saintly way. So these are people who are saints. There are no doctors who aren't also saints.
When I first arrived at St. Michael's, I had heard about the process to canonize the Martyrs of La Florida, and that was the first time I'd ever heard of them. Can you tell us more about them?
Sure. And I can also point you to the website of the postulators who are putting forward these people for canonization at martyrsoflaflorida.org. And on the website, you can see the stories of each person, of each group of martyrs. So La Florida was the Spanish territory in colonial America, and it covered a large part of our southeastern United States. So it encompassed all of Florida, Georgia, up into Virginia, west of Florida, into Mobile, Alabama and Mississippi, and then into the islands surrounding Florida and down into Cuba as well. In that whole territory, there were many events, martyrdom events of different people, missionaries, Native Americans, who were killed. That they were killed, there's no question. The question of martyrdom is a question of whether or not they were killed out of hatred for the faith. So for some of these martyrdom events, Native Americans of one tribe or faction killed Native Americans from another tribe or faction. And there were politics involved in that as well. Political killings don't result in people being named martyrs. It's got to be out of hatred for the faith. So, without getting into too many specifics, just to give some examples of the heroism of these people, in one of the events, there was the martyrdom of a priest and two young altar servers, and they were escaping. I mean, they weren't seeking to die; they were escaping. But the killers got hold of the altar servers, the children, and were torturing them so that they would scream. And so the priest heroically went back to try to rescue them and to save them or to trade his life for theirs, and they were all martyred and killed. And that's not just politics, right? There's something to religion in that. Antonio Aniha, Antonio Quipa Aniha means, it's a title more than a name. But Antonio is kind of the lead name for the martyrs, or the presumed martyrs. They're not canonized yet. They've gone through the diocesan phase, the initial phases of investigation, and now they're in Rome to undergo that phase of the process. But he was nailed to a cross and burned alive. The fact that they would choose that form of execution shows the faith being attacked, not just the people. They knew that this was something dear to them, and because of that, they were killed in this particular way. So I have high hopes, that they will be canonized. It's been long overdue, I think. These people, different events and different times, but they go centuries back. And the people in our area know of their existence. They know that there were martyrs that were killed here.
So it's not just one group of people at one particular time in history. It goes over decades?
No, it's several groups. And they have the map on the website with at least 15 martyrdom events. And with each one, you can read the description of the story of how they were killed, what the circumstances were, and what's known about them. So this is all public information. The actual process of the canonization is more confidential, so I can't talk about the specifics of that. I was the judge over the tribunal that oversaw the diocesan phase of their process of canonization or beatification. There was an historic commission of professional historians who researched in Spain and Cuba and the United States to try to get at the specific documents authenticating the stories and distinguishing between actual history and legend.
How involved will Pope Leo be in this decision?
Well, the Pope is involved in these decisions as much as he wants to be. That's not to say that he doesn't want to be involved, but he may take a personal particular interest in one canonization cause or another, because the Vatican is receiving these petitions for canonizations from all over the world. The fact that Pope Leo is an American, and these are people who were killed in America, may, I'll say, pique his interest to the extent that he would get more involved, but that's up to the Pope.
What do you hope that people will take away from learning about the Martyrs of La Florida?
I think the power of sanctity, the power of holiness that these people, and the universal appeal of the gospel, these people, they're certainly not Jewish, and not any Jewish roots in these Native Americans. And yet somehow this Jewish man who claimed to be God, and we believe to be God, Jesus Christ, his life, his death especially, his resurrection, the story of his gospel was so compelling to them that they were willing to sacrifice their lives out of love for him and defense of what they believed in him. So the fact that people may question the relevance of the gospel today, what impact can the gospel really have today? People have heard it, they're tired of it. They've heard of Jesus, they're tired of Jesus, they don't want to hear it anymore. Well, maybe they do, and maybe they need to. These Native Americans, what did we expect that their hearing the gospel would bring to their lives? What impact would a modern day skeptic think that the gospel could have authentically on these Native Americans? Maybe they imagined that these people were brainwashed, or that they were tricked or forced into professing the Christian faith, that they were coerced into baptism. Antonio died burning on a cross, seeing a vision of the Blessed Mother. He died a happy saint because of the power of the gospel. So I think the takeaway from their witness is the real power of the gospel for anyone who professes faith in it.
Was he able to really see a vision of Mother Mary?
In fact, the image of him shows the vision.
And he was able to say that as he was burning.
Yeah, so this is Mary was there comforting him as he was dying, crucified. So that's the Blessed Mother.
But she's shown as Native American in appearance.
Yes, yeah. This is a quote from the description of Antonio's martyrdom on the website of the Martyrs of La Florida. It's actually martyrsoflafloridamissions.org is the name of the website. Antonio Anija and several others were martyred in the aftermath of the English and Creek attack on the Ayubale mission in January of 1704. Antonio was an Anija, so it's not his name, it's his title, second in command of the mission of San Luis de Talimali, which is in modern-day Tallahassee. This was the largest Appalachian mission in La Florida, with a population of approximately 8,000 Christian natives, among whom Antonio lived. Their English and Creek captors tied them to stakes and lit fires at their feet. Despite this torture, these Catholic natives encouraged each other and attempted to evangelize their tormentors. After suffering from dawn until dusk, Antonio received a great gift. The Blessed Mother appeared to him. Antonio declared that the Most Holy Virgin was helping him to endure his martyrdom. The extraordinary faith and holy death of these Florida natives captured the admiration of the Spanish king, Philip V, who directed his ambassador in Rome to inform the Pope of this event.
How does it feel to personally be involved to make someone a saint, possibly?
Well, certainly there was a great sense of responsibility to do it right and to make sure that we were diligent in all that we undertook with regard to investigating the causes. Certainly a sense of unworthiness. Who am I to decide whether or not this person who was burned alive for the faith should be canonized a martyr? I mean, I'll quote Pope Francis, who am I to judge? Obviously in a different context, but I felt terribly unworthy to be a part of that and to have that role and responsibility. But I think part of the unworthiness led me to be all the more diligent in trying to carry it out and do it as it should be done. So we followed every thread, every possible piece of information or source of information that we could track down. Anybody that had anything to say about them, we tracked down, positive or negative, for or against, anybody that we could, including other Native Americans. It was fascinating.
What if you find out during your lifetime that they will be canonized? How will that feel?
Well, I fully expect that they will. I mean, I kind of write it off as myself being more of a paper pusher in this process. I mean, I didn't make them saints. I didn't canonize them. Their lives are what make them saints. Their heroic actions are what make them saints. I honestly would not have known the stories of their lives had I not been pointed to this process. And I'm so glad that I do know their legacy and their witness, and hope that they will be canonized. It was helpful that I didn't know about them so that I could be that much more objective in the process. I didn't have a vested interest in it other than coming to know the compelling stories of their lives and their deaths, and now certainly wanting to see them canonized. And I look forward to being able to spreading their witness and their example once they are canonized, should that day come, fervently, because they, if the church does recognize and acknowledge their sanctity and their holiness and their sainthood, there'll be great examples for people undergoing even modern day persecutions right here in our land.
So next week, we'll learn about another doctor of the church. Is that right?
So St. Irenaeus of Lyon was born in 130 AD and lived until just after the turn of the century. So he's about 70 plus years old when he died, but was not named a doctor of the church until 2022. And what's fascinating to me about Catholicism, among so many other things, is just the variety of it all, that we have this man's, Irenaeus of Lyon, named a doctor of the church. At the same time, we're in the process of canonizing or trying to canonize 50 plus martyrs from La Florida, hopefully to be canonized within this decade, at least in the 2020s at some point. But it's all so new. I mean, their lives aren't new. He lived almost directly after the time of Christ. Irenaeus did. These martyrs, presumed martyrs of La Florida, lived in the 1700s, 1600s, several different martyrdom events. But we're hearing about them now, and we're learning about them now. Who knows what's to come, next year, the year after, under Pope Leo XIV, who he's going to canonize, who he's going to single out as important for us to focus in on and learn about, and what's going to happen. Who are the saints of today? Who are the people that are living those heroic lives right now as we speak, undergoing persecutions that we may not even know about? So when we talk about a podcast that communicates things from the heart of the church, each one of these people, whether a Native American in the 17th century or St. Irenaeus in the 2nd century or Pope Clement in the 1st century or Pope Leo XIV in the current day, because Christ works through all of these instruments, we're able to delve into the mind and the heart and the spirit of the church in every age, through so many people, through so many witnesses, through so many examples. It's exciting to me that this podcast is going to try to unpack as much of that as we possibly can. There's so much for us to appreciate and to look at Part of the intention of the podcast, as I've said before, is to try to not to get away from the big questions, the more common questions, but to give due time to these questions that never really get asked. Maybe not even to ask a question, but to be able to expose the life and the contribution and the legacy of somebody that has so much to teach us. This is what the doctors of the church do. They teach. They communicate some teaching of the church that's crucial and central. And so I'm really excited to hear from them and to learn from them and to help us all understand them better as we learn all that the church has to speak from her heart.
You've been listening to From the Heart of the Church with Father Joseph Fowler from the Basilica of St. Michael the Archangel in Pensacola, Florida. Learn more about the Basilica of St. Michael the Archangel in Pensacola, Florida at stmichaelbasilica.com.